Good day, I'm Colin Dangaard, and this is one of 7 horses I have on my property. All my life I've been engaged with horses. When I was 14 years old, living in the bush in Australia, I couldn't speak. So I started talking to my horse. That worked well. I learned to speak. Not only did I learn to speak, I learned to write, having been kicked out of every school on the planet. So I went to bush, as they say, and had a good time and learned to speak. Then I got a job in the newspaper, and 25 years later I'm in America, the highest paid journalist, freelance journalist in America by far, after 30 countries. And I'm now doing a podcast, and I'd like to reveal all of that. The bottom line is, you can do a lot with very little, and that's my story of my life. And one more thing. I'm so passionate about the horse and what it can do for, what it did for me and what it can do for everybody. I wrote a whole book about it called Talking with Horses. I can talk with this horse and this horse can talk to me. And together we can do extraordinary things. So we're going to talk about that in my podcast. There goes my hat.
All this time, beyond time and space, our pleasure, forever. I look for your face, beyond time and space, forever. We're lost in pleasure.
Good day, I'm Colin Dangaard, and welcome to the Colin Dangaard Show. With me is my crazy co-host, Jared Williams.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
I'll slap him around a little bit and it'll cool him down.
Welcome everybody. I'm really excited. We are launching and we are talking about how you can create a better life for yourself with doing very little. Isn't that right, Colin?
Well, definitely. I'm a classic example. Hardly went to school. Got thrown out of every school I ever went to. My dad kicked me out of the house when I was 14. So what did I do? I went bush, as they say in Australia. Found a lagoon, made a fish spear out of somebody's wire fence, and helped myself to the fish in the lagoon. And I speared wallabies and cooked those in an open fire. And it was great. I mean, I lived fantastically in the bush.
I have to ask you this, Colin. Did you find that you were able to harness the power of the earth, that you were able to tap it and find a way to move forward with it?
Yes, indeed I did. And one way I did it, I'd played with Aboriginal kids when I was a kid. And because they were a bit embarrassed about me being startlingly white, I used to cover myself in mud. And then they accepted me a lot better.
So that's like when you become one of them.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And when I went bush, at 14 years of
Once
age.
you go bush, you never go back?
That's for sure. But I found that I just took all my clothes off, made a loincloth, and stuck my clothes up in a tree and covered myself all in mud, just like I did when I was a kid. And that did a lot of things. One, it kept me warm at night, the mud.
Yeah.
Number 2, the sun didn't burn me. That was very important. But most important of all, I became like an animal. The wildlife didn't run away from me. The wallabies didn't leap off, and then were difficult to find and to spear.
Yeah.
But when I was covered in mud, I could walk up to them, and with their lovely little eyes, and I felt really bad about driving a spear in them. But my rumbling stomach told me that that's what I should be doing.
You got to eat, right? Now, I know that you went from being hardly able to speak, which I guess is like sort of why you found yourself in the bush, because you kind of were cast away. You discovered how to talk through talking to animals.
Yes, well, I discovered how to talk by talking to my horse, Queenie. I'm the only one in the bush, and I had this mare that somebody gave me because this person was trying to make race horses, and he used Queenie to pony his horses around the track, but Queenie wasn't fast enough, so he gave Queenie to me. And she was a lovely little mare and quite fast for my purposes, but I'd tie her right next to where I was sleeping, and I made a nice place to sleep by the lagoon in the mud. and I slept in the mud.
Now, did Queenie keep you warm? Would she like be
No,
next
but
to you?
she kicked the hell out of me if that happened. But no, but I had somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
So I started talking to Queenie, and I started telling Queenie stories. And then it just occurred to me one day after a couple of months of this that, hey, I can speak. I'm speaking like normally. My words are not running over each other. And so I practiced talking to Queenie. I'd say, hello, Queenie, how are we doing this morning? And she'd just look at me like I'm stupid. And that's how it went. And then I rode Queenie out of the area I was in, and I found this old guy approached me in an old beat-up old truck. And I thought, oh, here I go. The cops are going to get me now because the police are looking for me. I should be in school, and I wasn't.
Right.
I just ran away.
Because you're running around like Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, yeah, I'm having a great time.
And this is telling you guys Colin's story of how he got to where he is today, and also what he had to do to get there. And by being in the bush like this and surviving like this, suddenly everything starts to change to help you develop your passion.
Yeah, well, for me, my passion was writing because I couldn't speak well, so I wrote notes to people.
That makes sense.
And
yeah.
and I read a lot, and I read mostly Jack London. Anyhow, to continue my story there, I decided my mother used to send out occasionally, hang a sugar bag, burlap bag, full of some essentials like self-raising flour and a few and tea and that sort of stuff. And
The basics.
the basics. And she even sent me some toilet paper, and I said, I don't need that. I can just dip my butt in the lagoon. It's okay.
But you didn't use the proverbial banana leaf as we kind of think of. Were there banana leaves?
No bananas where I was. But my point is that I had very little in the beginning.
Yeah.
But yet I had a lot. First of all, I had the whole bush. I owned the bush. There was nobody there for 25, 30 miles. I could have owned it all. In fact, in my own head, I did.
Well, you start to create, like, there's this creativity that entertains you. You become one with the...
there was plenty to eat.
Yeah.
There was fish in the lagoon. I speared those and cooked them, and they were beautiful. And I speared wallabies and cooked those and blackened them up, and then you cut off all the black stuff, and you get down to the flesh, steaming meat, and it was very good. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. And
Could this diet be why you look so young for your age? And you work, how many days a week do you work?
Every day.
Here in Malibu. This is the Malibu Ranch right now that you can see our set every day.
Every day, yeah. I just work until I go to sleep. And I work
and you started out with like a very meat-forward diet.
Yeah.
And wild meat.
Yeah,
as well.
I ate everything, anything and everything. And, like today was a typical day for me. I got up at 5 o'clock, saddled my horse at 5:30 with Dr. Ed Wagner, who's a good friend of mine. And
Dr. Ed.
And we galloped off into the hills, he and his with his girlfriend Christina, and we rode for 3 hours. And
Wow.
when we ride, you follow me, and it's hard riding.
They ride hard.
I pick very bad country because I like to give myself a bit of a heart thump. I don't like if I don't half
Are
scam.
you sure that's not you also getting a little a rise out of seeing what their reactions are?
Oh no! Well, now they've got used to me, and they've become very good riders because of riding with me now for Ed for 25 years and Christina for the last 5 years.
Well, it must be hard to be fearful when you have such a fearless leader.
Well, people say, you're fearless. I say, no, I'm not fearless at all. I experience fear, but I embrace fear. If I feel scared about something, I looking down a cliff, I'm going to go down, and I tell myself, I'm a little bit apprehensive about this. Well, that's good enough for me to go forward. Right. Why are you apprehensive? And I embrace the fear.
Yeah.
Embrace the fear, because fear is actually your friend. We all survive because we answer to our fears.
Right.
Somebody sneaks up behind you and lets off a cracker or something. Well, you duck, don't you? Automatically. That's your instinct calling for you to survive. So I like to hone into that. And fear is a wonderful thing. I steeplechased for years.
That would be a good example.
Oh man,
Wow.
I crashed. I crashed a good 20, 30 times steeplechasing, and I've had 9 concussions. I should be dead. I split 4 helmets.
Wait a minute. You've had 9 concussions. 4 of them split the helmet.
Yes. And
So is that part of the should be dead part? Is when the helmet was split? Because I would think that when the helmet gets split, it's a pretty near.
it's very well. I
Death
still
experiences.
have a few creaks in my neck because of it. But what the hell? I'm 81 years old, and
What the hell?
and if all I've got a few creaks in my neck, all of it was worth the thrill of especially steeplechasing. I love that race. I was back in Pennsylvania doing a steeplechase one day, and
How would we explain steeplechasing to our listeners?
well, steeplechasing is where you're going 3 miles, 36 jumps, and you're going flat gallop. The jumps are 4 foot solid and brushed to another 18 inches, so they look like 5 jumps. The horses jump the first few jumps very tall, but then they quickly realise after several jumps that there's nothing under there, so they keep crashing into the tops of the jumps. Yeah, they keep crashing into the top of the jumps. But at the start of one of these jumps, one of these races, I saw this kid. He's a kid. I was then about, I don't know, approaching 40, I guess, and this guy was about 19 or 20.
Right.
And he was the colour of
I get
white.
that.
White. And he was, so I felt a bit of compassion for him. So
Yeah.
I sidled up beside him, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he says, "I'm terrified." And I says, "Well, that's okay." I said, "So am I." He says, "You are?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "But you've done this many times." I says, "Yeah, but you should embrace the terror. Terror is your friend. Embrace it and experience it. It'll make you sharper, quicker.
Yeah.
If you feel the fear, don't go to sleep.
Yeah.
Fear keeps you awake."
I thought driving around in Los Angeles was a near-death experience, but now that I know about steeplechasing, I don't think it's that
Anyhow,
bad anymore.
this kid says to me, he says, "Where should I be in this race? Should I be in front?" I says, "Well, let's think about that. If you crash in front, we're all going to be jumping over the top of you, in which case I'll warn you now, lay flat if you crash, okay? Horse will be okay. Horse will get up and gallop away. But you lay flat, otherwise you get run down."
Right.
And he says, "Well, what if I'm behind?" I says, "Well, you have a problem there too, because if somebody else goes down, you're going to have to jump over them."
Right.
And I can see the guy on the side, he's about to drop the flag to go. And the kid says to me, he says, "What about in the center?" I said to him, "No, don't be there. That's where I am. Flag drops and we're off." And so we're galloping along. We're in lap 3 of the races, and he's doing very good. I slow down a little. I'm on a very powerful horse who won every steeplechase he's ever in. Horse named Tower. So I slowed down a bit so the kid could catch up, just so I could have a conversation with him. We're coming around the last lap, and I look over and says, "Hey, you're doing good, mate. You're doing really good." I said, "We only got 400 yards to go. Put the spur in and the whip on, okay?" And so he said, yeah, and he's going like this. And I said, "And goodbye, Tower."
Oh, dude. Where was this?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have good steeplechasing over there. But
Yeah, so back to fear and embracing fear, like steeple. This
Yeah.
is a great example.
I embrace fear if I, all the time. I mean, I ride all the time. I ride every day, and I look for really bad country
Yeah.
because I know the horse can handle it.
Yeah.
Horses are they're survivalists, and they don't care about you. That's why I've had so many concussions, because jump a horse over a 4-foot jump and he jumps 3'6", you got a problem.
Oh, yeah.
So
100%.
so you,
And you've been involved with horses since what age?
well, since I was I can't remember when I was on a horse. I think there's a picture of me somewhere at 2 years old on a horse.
Wow.
But
And now you're one of the most famous Australian saddle makers, if not the most famous Australian saddle maker in the world.
well, so they say, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with it. But
Well, the quality is there,
but
especially if you go to AustralianStockSaddle.com. You can check it out yourself.
thank you, George. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I made my first saddle when I was 14 because I asked my father, who really hated me into the being with horses. He said, "This is absolutely ridiculous," and he was quite right. In those days, if a man rode a horse, he was considered worthless, an absolute waster, and probably a danger to society.
Why was that?
I don't know. They just did. Nobody. We had people we call ringers. You'd call them cowboys, and
Yeah.
they drove cattle 400 miles, and they just lived in the dirt and rode horses, and they were
So
fantastic. horsemen.
technology had moved on in some way, perhaps,
It
and
hadn't
then they
even-
thought that it was okay.
No, it hadn't even got there then.
Okay.
There wasn't any technology. We had a
But
telephone.
it was considered a lower class activity.
Lower class
I see.
activity.
Okay.
And then, and we never saw a woman on a horse. Women didn't ride horses. It was considered very unfeminine to ride a
So
horse.
if you did, was it like hubba hubba? Or
Yeah.
was it like, oh no, girl?
Yeah, no. What's a
You
girl?
might-
What's a girl doing riding a horse? In fact, I remember when I was 12 years old, my
Yeah.
father took me to the Cairns show, and Cairns was a fairly big city by the ocean there.
Yeah,
And-
that's that is
North
in
Queensland.
North Queensland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
north of
the
Brisbane.
main attraction was a woman riding a horse,
I can see that.
and she was the main attraction. Just a woman on a horse.
That's it.
Yeah,
Easy
that was
peasy.
it. That was it. So 20,000 people turned up to watch the main event, which is a woman riding a horse. And so
20,000.
yeah, and so she.
Wow.
So this woman
And now
came,
you have to be Beyonce.
and this woman came out all dressed in black, which I thought was pretty amusing, and she rode around the arena one time, and then she did a 3'6" jump with an umbrella. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And nobody had ever seen a woman on a horse because women didn't ride horses. They just didn't. And men who rode horses, as I said, were considered wasters.
And when was this around this time?
50s.
In the 50s. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I said to my father once when he was giving me a good flogging because I'd been camping out with the horses again, and I said, "Look here," I said, the Queen," and he was a great Queen. He was a great
Oh,
royalist.
he was a royalist.
Oh,
Okay.
very much so. And so I pointed out to him, I says, "The Queen rides horses." And he says, "Yes, but that's entirely different. And they're very special horses." And
It's side saddle.
yes, and it's
And
side saddle.
You have to curtsy to her and
Yes, and all that.
bow before.
But the horses.
see it.
The horse has always been the salvation of my life. Really, without the horse, I wouldn't have been anywhere. From the horse, I learned to speak, and because I learned to speak, I learned to make contact with the outside world, and ended up writing for magazines. And I met this old guy who gave me a typewriter. He left an old Royal Portable, left it behind a tree for me. I went and found that, and that was really the start of my incredible career as a writer of short stories. And in those days, it was very easy to get published. First of all, there was no television, so people amused themselves by by reading comics. There were adult comics and
or radio.
some radio, not a lot of radio.
Okay.
But some radio, and there was all these magazines, and so I'm writing for the men's magazines. I'm writing stuff about. I had invented a guy called Bruce, and he was wrestling crocodiles and doing all macho stuff.
Bruce.
And Bruce, where's Bruce now? So
You'll find out.
I discovered from my Aunt Mary was one of them, my father's sister. He pointed out to me. He said, Mary pointed out to Auntie Mary. She said, I've been reading your stories in the women's magazines, in the men's magazines that your friend Fritz had sent me. I said, yeah. I asked him to send them to me. She said, you should write for the women's magazines. She said, they're the big magazines.
Mm-hmm.
They get all the ads and everything. And I says, yeah, well, I said, what do they publish? She said, romance stories. I said, romance? She said, yeah, you can write romance. I said, wow. So I thought about that, and I said, okay, well, I'll try romance. So I go back in the bush, and I'm thinking about romance. Well, I'd thought about, coupling a lot, I guess, in the bush alone. I thought, well, that's pretty good. I imagine this. Then I started imagining romance a little bit beyond what I'd been thinking about coupling.
Right.
But a little bit more than that. You had to
Right.
be romantic. And
Yeah.
so I started writing that, and that was a big success. And so that worked very well for me.
It must have been a big success because at some point women were like laying by their pool and they're like, all right. Wow. That sounds good. And this new perfume is on sale at the local store.
Yes.
That's
That's about it. Well, that's how the women's magazines. But it was great. And then,
what an extraordinary young man you were.
well, I don't think it was extraordinary. I mean, I just had a good time.
Yeah.
And one day I went down to visit Auntie Mary again, and she was raving about my stories in Woman's Weekly and Woman's Day. And she said, I didn't know you were so romantic. And I says, well, I just imagined that I was with a woman, but the trouble is the imagination would get away with me sometimes. And she said, yes, well, she said, you ought to make it better. You ought to make a career out of this. She said, you write like Hemingway. I said, really? She said, yeah. So I said, well, okay, I'll think about that. And she said, across the road from me lives Reg Sutton. I said, who's he? She said, he's the editor of the Cairns Post. I said, great. So she arranged for me to have an interview with Reg Sutton. So I'd been out in the bush all the time, and I hadn't been wearing shoes for about 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
And my feet I could put my feet in burr bushes and it wouldn't hurt me. No problem. My feet were just like...
They're like rocks.
Rocks, yeah. Unbelievable. But then I had to wear shoes. That was a real painful thing. So I got these shoes that were 2 sizes too big, and I go into Reg Sutton's place, and Aunt Mary had shown him some of my stuff that I'd written in the women's magazines. And he said to me, I sat down, and he says, your aunt says you write like Hemingway. He says, I disagree with that. He said, you write better than Hemingway. I said,
Wow.
really? I said, really? That's good.
Because you could have been like, oh, nah, she doesn't really mean that.
So he said,
It's like, no, but you're even
so
better.
he said, yeah, he said, I need a feature writer. He says, you'll be the feature writer. He said, I'll hire you right now. He says, I need your high school certificate, high school graduation certificate. I went, I just took a big swallow. I said, well, high school. Yes, I said, well, we had a big fire on the cattle property and lost all the papers. And he says, yeah, well, he said, I can't hire without a high school certificate. It's against the law. He said, so you can get it from the education department. I'll send you a copy. And I says,
I guarantee you this guy figured out a way to make this work.
so I go, yes, well, Reg Sutton says, well, yes, well, he says, write to the education department. I'll give you a copy, okay? But he says, I can't hire you without it. Forget it. And I says, yeah, okay. So I watched him, and he left that night, Reg Sutton. And as soon as he left, I went into the sub-editor who was doing the night shift.
Were you like sneaking? Like where were you hiding?
No, I was just hanging.
Okay, he's gone.
I was just hanging out in the main newsroom. As soon as I saw him with his briefcase leaving down the hallway,
Brilliant.
I knew he was going. So I went to the sub-editor, and I said to the night editor, and I says, well, I'm your new night reporter. He says, really? I says, yeah, my name's Colin Dangaard. He says, Mr. Sutton hired you? And he says, I said, yeah. He didn't tell me that. And I says, well, he did. I'm hired. He says, I said, what do you want me to do? I said, he said, well, I don't know. He says, yeah. He said, a guy out in Redfern attacked his neighbour with an axe. He says, why don't you...
Sounds like Redfern to me.
He said,
By the way, can you hear a baby crying over here? I feel like there's like maybe a baby crying somewhere in the house. Maybe it's my imagination. Maybe producer Will can go take care of that for a moment. But as you were saying, yeah.
Yeah, so when he left, when the editor had left, the
Yeah.
sub-editor said, "Okay, well," he said, "this guy in Redfern has attacked his neighbour with an axe." He says, "Go and talk to somebody about that." So I go and sweet talk the cops about that, and they tell me everything, and it was really, really good. I did well with it, and wrote up a big story. Stayed at the paper until 6 o'clock in the morning. Slipped the story under Reg Sutton's desk.
You're no stranger to hard work, especially when it comes to slipping under something Ray Sutton's desk. Right?
So
Thank you, producer Will. I'm sure we're all in good frame here anyways, talking about Ray Sutton. What a guy.
Reg Sutton, yeah. So anyhow,
Was it Red Sutton?
Reg Sutton, yeah.
Red, sorry. I
Reg,
thought I said
Reg.
Ray, Red.
No,
Reg.
Reg
Oh,
Sutton.
Reggie.
Yeah, Reggie. Yeah.
He didn't like being called Reggie.
Oh, Reggie. So I sent. So I slipped it under Reggie's door that morning and waited till he came back in. I hadn't slept all night, and I hear his door open and close, and
Was it a squeaky door?
no, slam door. He was always in a hurry and angry. He was always angry. So
What an asshole.
So his assistant comes to me and she says, "Colin, Mr. Sutton wants to see you, and he's not happy." I said,
dun,
"So,
dun."
really?" So I go in and see, and he said, "Don't sit down because this is not going to take long." He says, "You presented me with a real problem. I haven't hired you, so I don't know how to fire you, but I have to figure out how." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You masqueraded as a reporter
Right.
for the Cairns Post, and you weren't even hired. What is this? You pretended to be a reporter." And I said, "Well, it didn't take too much pretending." I said, "What'd you think of the story?" And
I
he
love
s-
your excuse for that. You're like, well, didn't take much pretending, but if you want to say it did.
Yeah, so anyhow, the next edition, it was all over the big story. So nobody ever asked me for my qualifications again. I went and picked up my paycheck, and I was on staff, and it was the start of a great career for me, really a great journalistic
Thank
career.
God you rocked that one. That was a
Yeah.
big risk, right?
Yeah, well, what was he going to do, throw me out? So what? I've been on the street before. It was no big deal. But journalism, for me, was just an incredible thing because now I could write as I always wanted to and get paid for it. And, and magazines in those days were fantastic. There were lots of magazines, hundreds of magazines and all over the world.
It's really, really exciting to introduce to the world how incredibly successful you are, Colin, and how, you have made such an impact. You've interviewed so many celebrities. You were the highest paid journalist in the country.
Yeah,
at the time.
for a period of time. I was the highest paid syndicated journalist in print in the time.
This guy right here, you're looking at him.
And that went for about 5 years, and I had a very good time with it. But I got to say, it wasn't difficult. It was rather easy. I mean, all you got to do is tape record somebody talking, and whether they saw the tape recorder or not, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And like Frank Sinatra, he sued me for $20 million because I went to Bohutiswana and he was there opening Sun City for Sol Kersner.
Only 20 million.
Yeah.
Oh my
And,
God.
So that was very amusing because
That was a lot of money back then,
Yeah.
and it was amusing.
yeah, this is back in the
I'd be amused if somebody sued me for $80 million or whatever 20 million was back in the
that was in the mid 70s, right?
mid 70s. Yeah, exactly.
So 20 million then was about 60 million today. But anyhow, I was then it was published by Rupert Murdoch and the national staff was starters and
Rupert Murdoch owns News Corp and Fox, and he's one of the richest Australians out
yeah,
there. No big deal.
and one of my first jobs when I left the Cairns Post was I went to Wellington in New Zealand and became editor of the Dominion Sunday Times, which Rupert would soon own. I'm not quite sure if he owned it then or not, but he would soon own it. And that was my leg in. And then
Now I see where you met him
Yeah.
and built that relationship. Before the Star, because the Star, you end up working for the Star, and then
Yeah.
that becomes like the biggest competitor to the Inquirer. Which
Yeah,
is like
right.
the Pepsi and Coke of the day.
Yeah, right.
As far as like,
That's a good description.
as far as like the gossip media or
That's
what
a
you
good
want to say,
description.
is tabloids or whatnot.
But I got very much in cons with the National Enquirer.
This was the tabloid guy of the day. The tabloid guy right here that you're looking at right now was the guy. And he looked like John Denver, but we're going to get to that. I'm sorry. I get excited sometimes because I'm fanboying out maybe a little bit. I love you, man.
So it was great. I was in South Africa working for the Sunday Times there, and I'd been temporarily jailed in Zambia and went to Botswana and covered uprising in Salisbury, and so anyhow they started shooting white people. Blacks were starting to shoot white people. I thought, this is going bad. So
Yeah.
then I met my friend Dennis Budge called me, and we'd been deported together from Fiji and run out of Tahiti, and Dennis was also a really good journalist, and we used to have a lot of fun together. And being deported wasn't much of the fun, but in a way it was, I guess.
I don't feel like being deported is ever fun.
So
Maybe sometimes.
So Dennis calls me up, and he said, and I'm in Johannesburg, and I'm looking for a place to get. I'm going to go out of there. He happens to call me, and he says, "Colin," he says, "what are you doing?" I says, "Well, I'm in Joburg, working for the Sunday Times."
Joburg. I love how you
And he says,
partying in Joburg,
and he's-
Johannesburg for short.
and I says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm down in Cape Town. I sailed a 34-foot catch from Australia." I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "America." I says, "Funny you should mention that. That's exactly where I'm going. Don't know how I'm
Perfect.
going to get there, but I think I'm going to get there on your boat."
Yeah.
And he says, "Well,
We don't have to go through the security lines. We don't have to
Yeah.
deal with the, I don't know, the customs and border control.
So he says, "Yeah, come on down." He says, "Come on down." So anyhow, I tell my friend, I tell my wife then, it was Kay.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Kay was she was a nice lady, but she was she sort of saw herself as very high class, and saw myself as very low class.
But she must have been very beautiful.
Oh, she was quite attractive, yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Of course.
but she was. So anyhow, I said to her, I went back to the apartment in Johannesburg, and I says, "Well, guess what, my dear? We're going to America." She said, "About time you chose someplace that was half civilized." I says, "Yes, well, we're going."
Well, she had a point.
Yeah, she had a point.
Yeah.
I'd dragging her all over Africa. So I said, "Well, there's we're going to get there." She said, "How are we going to get there?" I says, "On a yacht." She says, "Oh, really? On a yacht?" I says, "Yeah, a yacht." She says, "Oh, great." So we pack up our little suitcases, and we go and we
Did you really make that facial expression like,
so we get on the bus and go down to Cape Town, and we got our little suitcases and walk along the plank.
she must have been happy about the little suitcase part. It's a woman, for God's sakes.
So,
That's all you need is the carry. It's like Spirit Airlines, where all you're allowed to bring is a backpack. This is all you need.
I said, "Leave all that stuff behind. We don't need it." And so we're walking down the dock in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And at the end of the dock happened to be a 160-foot yacht owned by a guy called Franson. You might have heard of Franson, but he was a very, very well-known Canadian, a rich guy. His name was Franson.
I know a lot of rich Canadians.
Yeah,
actually.
well, he was very rich.
Okay.
So anyhow, she stops and looks at this yacht parked at the end of the pier, and she says, "Finally, you've done something sensible." She said,
Sensible. You've done something miraculous if you have a big yacht like
I said,
that.
I said, "I'm sorry, honey. The yacht you're looking at is not the yacht, okay?" "It's not?"
It's not the yacht.
"Well, show me the yacht." So we go down and we walk along. We go down
Past this big, huge boat.
It takes us about 10 minutes to walk the length of that boat. And at the parked underneath the boat, down at the stern, was the yacht called the Pacific Crusader. And there's Dennis down there my old mate Dennis, and I haven't
He's
seen.
like, hey, how you doing?
How you doing, Cole? Yeah,
She's like, He
great.
doesn't smell great. He doesn't look
and,
great.
And so he says, "Come on down, welcome aboard." He says, "Take the rope ladder there."
Oh, she's having none of it.
Oh, she looks at me and says, "You mean we're sailing to America and that?"
She's like,
She says,
you who
"I
wore a
don't-
loincloth
I don't-
and grew up in the bush.
I don't think so, she says. I said, "Look, let's get aboard." So we climb down, we get aboard, and Phillida was there. He married Phillida Fitzgerald, who was the daughter of Australia's poet laureate. And she was a real hippie chick. She had big tits, and she wore no bra, and she wore nothing on them. So she's flopping around with the big tits, and Kay had no tits, and so this was a bad thing to start with. So, so she says, "I can't do this," and I says, "Yes, you can. We're going to do this.
Right.
The boat's going." And we had the boat
I
had
have no choice.
the boat had
going.
the boat had no motor, and
Who needs a motor?
no, that's what I said. We got sails, but Dennis said to me, he announced to me, he says, "Well, Colin," he says, we do have a problem with the yacht." He says, "It's sinking all the time. We have to
Shucks.
recork it." And I says, "Yeah, that's probably a good idea. It's sinking all the time, and you'd roll out of bed and you'd be up to your ankles in water because the bilge was full and everything." So
And how many feet was it again?
34 feet.
Okay, so 34 feet. There's some living space there.
A little
Not a lot of space for water up to the ankles, though.
No, not a. No.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we slipped the boat. I says, he said, "Well," he says, "I have to learn to navigate." He says, I missed Africa by 1,000 miles, so he said, I have to narrow that down a little bit."
That's how we got down to Johan.
I said, "Well," I said, "How'd you find Johannesburg?" I said, "How'd you find Cape Town?" He says, "Well, I just hit the coast and kept going south until I ran out of land, and so I found Cape Town." So I said, "Well, why don't you go and learn to navigate? We'll slip the boat,
Yeah.
and I'll do the recorking." I
Good
said,
idea.
"I'm pretty handy with stuff." So we pull the boat up on the slips.
Anything could have gone really, really wrong here, but you seem to like save the
Yeah.
day by saying like, I can do that.
I can cork the
I
boat.
don't know if I can do that, but I'll
I said, "No."
figure out a way to do that.
I said, "Here's all the money I have, so go and get some supplies." So I sent him off to get some supplies while I'm corking the boat. I'm down there, and we got the boat up on the slips there, and these old salts are around, and they come up to me, and the old guy says to me, "What are you doing with this piece of crap?" I says, "We're going to sail to America."
Wait, what old guy?
Some old guy just...
Some random old guy comes over like, what you gonna do with this old piece of crap?
yeah, these old salts walking
To
around.
make it all worse.
These old salts, they work for a few bucks.
That's creepy. You're like, F off. I'm
Re-
working on it.
Recorking.
Jesus.
And I says, "If you could tell me how to recork," I said, "I need to know how to do it." He says, and he had a screwdriver. He pulled a screwdriver out of his belt and he poked it in the side of the boat.
What an asshole.
And it went straight in.
Uh-oh.
And water came out.
Well, maybe he had a
and
point.
He said,
Okay.
And he said, "You see this? It's waterlogged." He says, "You can't sail this out of the harbour." I says, "Not only are we going to sail it out of the harbour, we're going to sail it to America." Oh, forget it.
Like that?
Yeah. He says,
Did he have a point?
"Oh, yeah, he had a point up after that."
So
He had a
how the
point.
heck
So I said, "Well, I'm going to recork it and stop the water coming in," and so that's what we're going to do. So while I'm recorking the boat, Dennis is figuring out how to navigate. He's learning logarithms and stuff like this, So we finally get on board, and we're waiting for the land breeze. We have no motor. So we got the land breeze has to come, so we put up the sails, and it takes us out to sea.
A true life story of adventure with 99% risk.
So we get out, and now we got these big rollers coming around the goddamn horn. They're 40-foot waves, big rollers.
Oh, rollers.
Rollers,
Okay.
yeah, rollers, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I thought rollers was like a marijuana kind of.
I wish we had rollers. Wish we had those rollers, but we didn't.
Right.
So we get around the horn, and we're cruising down these things, and it was rough as guts. And I got seasick because I hadn't been on the sea for long. Hadn't been on the sea forever. And
Rough as guts.
and Kay got sick, and so I go down and see her, and she's she's spewing her guts up, and after a couple of days, she says to me, she says, I gotta do a passage. She says, I mean, you want to take a dump? Yeah. She says, yeah. I says, well, she says, where's the head? I said, well, I have to tell you, there's no head on the boat. There's no head on the boat. She freaks out. How am I gonna do a passage? And I said,
Do
well,
a passage. Wow.
I said, well, you can just back out there over the spit, like we're
Yeah.
doing. Just hang on to the gunnels on either side and back up.
Yeah.
I said, here, I'll tie a rope around you. So I tied a rope around, and I said, you can back out there now, and I'll hold you. So we've got these big rollers behind us, and she backs out in a spit like this, and it's raining, and the wind is blowing, and the wind is blowing the rain parallel like this, and she's trying to hold on, and
Well, parallel is like slippery angle of rain.
Yeah, so the back of the boat goes up, and I'm watching her, and I got her on the end of the line there,
Jesus
and I'm holding her, and
Christ.
all of a sudden, to my horror, she disappears. The whole bowsprit goes into the next wave.
Was it for the better? Wait, oh no, she didn't just.
And she came up. She rose out of the ocean, hanging onto the gunnels, and it looked like an
She
apparition.
rose like a lempress among the Serengeti. Wow.
Rose right down. I said,
Like a phoenix.
yeah, it was the most amazing thing I ever saw.
Wow.
And she says, "And I hate you." And she got again like this. She got.
She was like possessed by the ocean. Like Poseidon got into her, and she's like,
And
you.
and the next
making
time
me shit on a boat.
And the next time she came up, I said, "Have you gone yet?" Because I want to pull her in. So, anyway, that was the start of the journey. So you can imagine how it went downhill after that. 68 sailing.
I don't
days.
see how it could go any further downhill than it already was downhill.
Oh, 68 sailing days, man. That was something.
68 sailing days.
Yeah. And,
Dude.
yeah, it was really wild.
I could barely do a 7-day cruise in the Caribbean.
But you weren't trying to keep the boat afloat.
Oh, that's for sure.
Keeping the boat afloat was something else.
No, it just means in like I start to get a little seasick, but like on this little boat, dude, you got through the rollies.
But back at the port, back in Cape Town.
Meanwhile,
an-
back in
an
Cape
old-
Town,
An old guy had said, one of the old guys had said to me, you're never going to make it. He says, if this boat doesn't sink, he says, the doldrums is going to get you. I says, the doldrums? What are
not the doldrums.
What are the doldrums? And he says, haven't you looked at a chart? And I says, well, our main chart
Is
is...
it a cross between a doll and a drum?
I said, our main chart is the centerfold from the Saturday Evening Post. That's what we're using.
Whoops.
He says, the doldrums will get you. He says, there's thousands of ships down there. I says, what's there? He says, nothing. That's what's in the doldrums, nothing. And he says, you got no motor to get you across the doldrums. How are you going to get from one side of the doldrums to the other side? I
So
says,
crazy old man is telling you that that's where ships go to die,
yeah.
and
Because,
he wants you to, and you're going to cross it anyway.
yeah, but these are sailing ships. If you got a motor, you could do it. But we had no motor.
This is how he rides horses around.
We had no motor. So
We're going to go over the place where all these people have fallen off their horses right now. Yeah.
So-
Anyway, and you went through it anyway.
well, we
my
so we get to the doldrums, and
Scream, guy.
yeah, and all of a sudden there was nothing, no wind, no
Was it
nothing.
all like quiet and
Yeah,
creepy?
deathly quiet.
Was there like a voice that was like, oh,
Yeah,
like
If you threw an egg carton over the side
Right.
at night, it'd be still there in the morning.
that is and this
It's
is
still there. So
an area of ocean, like a
I-
narrow.
yeah, well, it could be for 1 mile, it could be for 10 miles. The old guy didn't know anything. He didn't know how long it'd be. He said, it could be several miles. He said, if you don't have a motor, you're not going to get across it.
I feel like this is a scene out of like Pirates of the Caribbean
'Cause
or
it's-
something, where
'cause
it's like you get to this misty,
No, I'll-
calm part of the ocean.
I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
So we're all meanwhile half off our heads, right? We don't have enough food. All the money I gave Dennis, what did he do? He brought baked beans and spaghetti. I mean, cartons and cartons of baked beans and spaghetti. I said, Dennis, why did you buy just baked beans and spaghetti? He said, I got a deal on them. He said, they gave me as much as I could carry.
I promise I'm not going to make him baked beans and spaghetti for dinner ever.
So it was baked beans and spaghetti.
And that was a dumb idea because why?
Well,
because
no. The cans keep a long time, so he had something.
Because you're just going crazy, right? Because you haven't eaten right, you haven't been sleeping right.
Yeah,
shitting off the side of the boat.
Yeah, and you start to get with the heat.
Yeah.
You start to get weird.
How sunburned are you guys anyway?
You start to get delirious.
Like a crust.
I'm seeing things.
Red crust.
But to keep some sense of routine and civility, what we do is we still did our shifts on the tiller. The boat's not going anywhere, so you just hung onto the tiller.
Okay.
So I'm hanging on to the tiller. I'm doing the shift from midnight to 4 in the morning. So I'm hanging on the tiller, and I'm
Tea for the tillerman.
So I'm really feeling weird, and
Otherworldly.
yeah, and I look over the up on the gunnels up on the side of the boat around the cabin. I can see up on the top, there's a pirate hanging there, a pirate. I'm going, my goodness, there's a pirate
Hanging there, like under
hanging on the halyard,
Oh.
hanging on to the ropes that hold the sails
Okay.
up. He's hanging on that and he's looking out. And I'm thinking, who is? I said, that's Dennis. He's got a pirate's outfit from someplace. So I said, Dennis.
Just stop by the local market, grab the pirate's
well,
costume.
I'm wondering where he would have got this outfit from. Because he had a sword and, paisley jacket and
Okay, I'm getting scared now.
black high boots and stuff. And I think this is like weird. And I call out Dennis. And the pirate doesn't move. And I'm thinking, and I have to me, it's real. I'm sure that's that Dennis. So I thought, I'm just going to sneak up. Dennis must be in another world or something, so I'm going to sneak up there. So I lashed the tiller, and I went on the other side, sneaked up around the decking and around the cabin area. And I sneak around behind the front of the cabin, and said, Dennis, the pirate half turns, and then he's gone.
Vanish.
And I go, wait a minute. I slap myself in the face and think, well, this is weird.
You're like,
Yeah, this is like weird. So next day I don't say anything to Dennis, but I so really want to ask him about this. So I said, well, maybe I just,
wait. The pirate, was it a ghost? Was it a real pirate, or was it Dennis?
No, it looked like a real pirate, but it
Did it look at you and be like, you must start believing in ghost stories. You're in one. You're like, ah! You feel like you're going back in slow motion.
So-
Like, those dreams where you can't run fast enough and the hallway keeps getting longer.
Yeah, but you couldn't run too fast. You couldn't run further than 32 feet on this pace. So anyhow, next day I get back in the well. It's still my night shift, and I'm thinking,
Uh-oh.
that's that damn pirate again. So I decided this time I'm going to play it real cool. I now am convinced that it's some ghost of a pirate. I'm convinced of it because I slap my face and I'm not imagining it. No, I tell myself, no, I'm not imagining it. It's not Dennis, but I can see it. Same paisley jacket, the same silver sword, same big high black boots, the same 3-corner black hat. I go, wow. So I said, okay, Mr. Pirate, I want to know, when's the squall coming? When's the rain coming?
Okay.
We're running out of water. And to my surprise, the pirate half turns and he says, squall in 3 days. 3 moons, he said. Not days, he
He
said.
like half turns like slowly, like.
Yeah. I just see his profile. He just says, squall, 3 moons. I said, wow, thank you. So he's gone. Then he's gone. I said to Dennis next day, I said, Dennis, I got to tell you something. I said, I'm seeing things. I said, I saw a pirate last night. He looks at me and he says, no, I didn't tell you I saw a pirate. I said, I'm seeing things on the deck.
Okay.
And he says, You saw the pirate. So he told me he saw the pirate. I said, you've seen the pirate before? He says, yeah, it's been here for weeks. It's just a pirate hooking a ride. I said,
Hooking a ride.
hooking a ride, yeah. And I says, wow,
How perfect with the hook thing. I'm dead.
hooking a
Well,
ride.
apparently so was the pirate.
Yeah, and he says, and I said, well, I said, he told me something. Oh, you think I'm crazy? Now you're talking to ghosts and you think I'm crazy? He said, yeah, well, he says, the pirate told me there's going to be a squall in 3 days. So he should get the dinghy out and position it under the sail and get the sail ready. So if the wind blows, the rain comes, we'll catch a dinghy full of water.
Okay.
And he says,
Yeah.
stupid idea. I says, well, we're doing nothing. Let's do it. All right, so we do it. And sure enough, 3 days later, a squall comes. Blasting. Rain hits the sail.
And you need this water in the dinghy for
us.
drinking.
For drinking, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
to survive.
Yeah, we were getting low.
Don't get this. If the pirate didn't tell you shit,
Yeah.
you're going to die of thirst.
We probably could have, yes, we could have, because water was running low. So then it says, wow. So he sort of went along with that a bit, and that was it. Then we proceeded again, and it was all okay, but never saw the pirate again, and it was just
Wow.
a strange.
Now, like, do you to this day still believe that you really saw something, or do you think it was just like being,
I don't know.
You can't say yes or no.
I
for
can't
sure,
say
right?
yes or no.
I believe in the pirate. Don't
Well,
y'all? Don't
yeah.
y'all? I do too.
Well, I tell you what, I believed in him at the time because he said the squall was going to come in 3 days, and it did.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and it did. So we kept bailing out the boat and kept.
It was something.
Yeah.
You were tuned in to something,
Yeah.
and you've always
Yeah.
been tuned into a higher frequency
I always felt that.
your whole life. You have a gift, Colin.
Yeah.
You really, really
Well,
do.
thank you. But
Yeah.
I feel that with horses. I feel it with all living creatures. I feel I can talk with them, and I feel I know what they're thinking, and they know what I'm thinking. I don't have any animals that ever bite me or kick me or do anything because I'm their friend.
Yeah.
So they just don't do that. But that taught me a lot about what's out there. There's a lot out there, and when you think about it, it's just another dimension. That we have this dimension that we're all familiar with,
Right.
but there's other dimensions, and if you concentrate on it, you can get into those dimensions, especially with animals. Animals, we have an aura that extends. It actually centers in our heart is the center of it, but it goes out 8 or 9 feet. So, and a horse's aura goes out 12, 13 feet. So you get in to within 12 feet or 10 feet of a horse. Their heartbeat affects your heartbeat. It can slow down your heartbeat.
Wow.
That the impact is so great. And not to mention what they're doing. Horses talk to each other mind to mind.
Yeah.
And if you can get
This
in,
will remind you guys of like Avatar or something
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
right? Yeah, where it's like where you're connected.
you're connected.
Humans and horses were meant to be connected. with
Yes,
each other.
well, we've got a history of 5 million years, us and the horse.
It's a long time being friends.
Yeah,
right?
well, we used to eat them.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. But the horses, our horses are our longest living friend. They say the dog is next.
Right.
But the dog is
Not Nala though. She's worthless. She can't do anything.
But the horse
No,
is
it's my dog.
the horse has this aura about it, and it's got this electromagnetic field that's very powerful, and it's like it has 4 legs that are plugged into the earth. The earth is the biggest generator of electricity there is. It's powerful.
Yeah.
The electric that comes out of the earth.
Yeah.
So the horse is plugged into it. If you're sitting on a horse, that means you are plugged in much more than you're walking around in shoes with rubber soles. You're disconnected from the earth, actually. But when
Talk
you
about
sit,
getting energy at 5 a.m. in the morning.
yeah, well,
Comes right up.
yeah, well, I get on a horse at 5 a.m., which I did this morning,
Yeah.
and you feel that rush of energy. I just get so full of energy when I'm on the horse and galloping along in these hills here. My self vision is I'm galloping along
kid.
and I got a sword and I'm gonna kill. You know. You
You're
know.
a warrior. You get the warrior feeling.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
I think the warrior feeling keeps you young. I think it keeps you energetic. I think that it's something that's inside of all of us is that we need to fight to survive.
Yes.
We
Well,
need to sacrifice.
yeah, we need to. Well, man's a fighting creature. We're brilliant fighters. We're great survivalists.
Yeah.
We can out-survive any other animal in any of their environment. We can out-survive them.
Yeah.
That's how good at survival we are. But when you're on a horse, you feel that power, and it comes from the earth. And this is an old thing. The Roman soldiers, for example, during the time of Julius Caesar, who was the first Roman emperor, and he created an army that was unbeatable. And he got power from he believed that all these warriors should have their backsides on a horse with nothing between their backside and the horse except maybe a quilt or something.
So just their butt, a quilt, and then
that's it.
the horse.
So
Yeah.
they could, and he was right about that. And when he went to, he conquered, he was thrashing all of Europe, and then he proceeded to the southern steppes of Russia where he met the Huns, and he was thrashing them too, until Attila came along, and now they've had a change of emperors in Rome, but the tradition kept on that their warriors keep their backsides on the horse. But Attila got this idea after he was thrashed by the Romans because they were expert.
Is that where they got the term "keep your ass on the horse"?
Right. So
Bless you.
the Romans were great with that short sword,
Yeah.
and much better than the Huns. The Huns were swinging axes and anything heavy they could get and try and knock people off the horses and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then Attila got this idea that he can't fight the Romans. He couldn't fight the Romans on the ground, and what was happening is a horse can gallop for 3 miles, and then you got to get off it because it has no back left if you ride it bareback.
Right.
If you ride it, because all your weight is under a small section of about 4 inches of the horse's back.
I see.
So Attila got this idea. Actually, the Chinese at that time in the year 400, the Chinese had for 700 years had a saddle, but they didn't use it to ride. They used a stirrup for mounting, and then they sat on it sideways,
Okay.
like a sort of a side saddle,
Okay.
and it got a bit more developed. But
Right.
they had the stirrup, and Attila knew about this stirrup because he's always trying to attack the Chinese, and he couldn't get over the wall, but he did learn about this stirrup.
It sounds like he wanted like the high ground. He wanted to be able to stand up
Yeah.
while riding or something.
Yeah, and then he figured that he could do that with the stirrup.
Ah.
So he got a stirrup. He put one on each side, and the Chinese only had the stirrup for mounting. They hung the stirrup down.
Talk about one-upping.
One-upping, yeah.
You guys, you got,
You got
two now.
that right. So they'd put their foot in the stirrup
Yeah.
and climb up on the horse and then take the stirrup up and flip it over the other side, and they'd ride without the stirrups. And
Wow.
so the Huns got this stirrup, and they built themselves a solid tree saddle, and which is why the solid part of a saddle to this day is called a tree.
Oh my
'Cause it-
gosh! Now I know what that means because, like, as a kid, I grew up with horses.
Yeah,
And I've rode Western, I should say.
yeah.
But as far as why my mom would be like, okay, now move over the tree and put it here. Now I know exactly
Yeah.
what that means.
Well, because Attila's first tree was actually a tree. He got a
So
mangrove.
this is the birthplace of the saddle.
Yeah, he got a mangrove that grew in like that
Yeah.
from a stalk this way, and the V went that way, and he made that V the part of the saddle that he built on, and
Right.
he built a thing
there.
he built a thing on the back of it.
This is, by the way, one of Colin's saddles, right?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
one of my saddles, and that was a tree. So the tree was first a tree, which is why it remained calling a tree. And now, when he when the Romans attacked the Huns again, he could stand in the stirrup, and the horses, the Romans are still riding bareback. And now Attila has this saddle that's displacing the weight over a bigger area and lowering the pounds per square inch. So the horse could easily go past 3 miles, go 10 miles, 15 miles, 100
So
miles.
he had the endurance
Yeah.
and the longevity, and could he like get up on the
Yeah.
saddles and be like, yeah?
Well, not only that, he could stand in the saddle and fire arrows backwards. So
Yeah.
the Romans were galloping at him, and they were doing 30 miles an hour at the gallop. They met arrows coming 30 miles an hour.
They're like, oh my God, we don't know what we are going to do.
Yeah, so point of impact was 60 miles an hour. Went through any armor they had. So that was once Attila got a saddle, the Roman Empire never won another battle against Attila. He just thrashed them. So the only reason why Attila ended up losing in the end was he had a big argument with his brother Bleda, who wanted to be the next
Innovation.
Attila.
Yeah.
So the whole Huns faction fell apart, and but it fell apart through a family fight, really.
At the end of the day, but innovation wins.
Oh yes,
Every
for
time.
sure.
Yeah.
And so today we have saddles, and of course the saddles can and
I like that. Innovation wins every time. That feels like where you could just bring.
yeah, but
And right there.
actually Attila set the stage for the saddle, because after him the horse continued on in battle for 1,000 years, and in the annals of military history, where the horse was a major component of the battle, it carried men to the battle, where they could get off and do battle, or stay on and do battle, as they used to do in knights of old time. But as things progressed, it was better to use the horse to get to where the battle was, get off, and camouflage yourself, and so you wouldn't get exhausted going to the battle. So
Wouldn't you say that horses and man, we should say humans, are so connected that they are fearless when they know that we're in this together? And because a lot of people say, like, why did horses want to rage into bullets, swords, all this stuff that was going on?
because
for
we
so
asked
long?
them to, and they're very faithful.
You're gonna feed me after this, right? Okay, fine. I'll do whatever.
Well, I think feeding's got a lot to do with it, but
Yeah, no, there's more than it's definitely more than that.
yeah, it's but horses. The charge of Bathsheba, for example, my uncle Jack was in. He was part of the Australian 7th Light Horse that fought in the Sinai, and he went down to meet the British general, whose name was Bellamy, and they were outside.
Bellamy?
Bellamy, that was his name.
Oh, okay.
The
I
general.
love that name.
Yeah, and he was. So the British had tried to run across to gallop across the Sinai, but then the Turks were in the town of Bathsheba, ringing the town of Bathsheba, and they had the world's largest guns with projectiles that could go 3 miles. So they were set outside the 3-mile limit, and that's where they couldn't progress any further.
Okay.
But the Australian light horse came through, and Bellamy had said to everybody that night, he said, okay, he says, I want everybody to have their horses saddled in the morning at dawn. Can't tell you what's going to happen, but it's going to be action. And up in the
Gotta be action.
yeah, but up in the northern Sinai where the regiment had been, they saw little action. There were a few Turks, but not many. So to amuse themselves, somehow the Australian commander got a whole bunch of swords from someplace. He probably got them from some market someplace, but they were real swords. So everybody did sword drill just to amuse themselves. They had Lee Enfield rifles and all sorts of stuff like that. They had good armament stuff.
Yeah, sword fighting's
Yeah, but they enjoyed hacking imitation heads off things, and they were doing this. And then when the Australian Light Horse was supposed to hand over their command to the British, Bellamy pulled his sword and he pointed it at the general.
Wow.
As if he was going to hand over his sword at command. Instead, he brought his sword up and he pointed at Bathsheba and said, "Charge!" And everybody galloped off. They were all ready. They didn't know where they were going or what they were doing, but he just galloped off.
Shit.
And these 500 light horses started galloping across the desert.
You've never even seen 500 horses actually in a movie.
It's
right? I mean, like, you might like have CGI and stuff, and like, you know, they make up this huge scene, but this is like, can you imagine?
500
This really happened.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of horse flesh. And so
Horse flesh.
now, a lot's been written about this charge of Bathsheba. Made a movie about it, actually. But from the Turks' point of view, they were watching this, and they were very amused. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Here they have the world's they have the world's biggest guns,
Yeah.
and they're being charged by these stupid people on horses charging them, waving their swords, and so they lowered their guns, but they couldn't lower them fast enough. The ordnance went over the head of the approaching horses. They went under the gun. They couldn't get them down fast enough, so they just kept going, and the Turks were so confident that nobody could attack them, that they had dug ditches and things, but they didn't put any spikes in the ditches or any of that stuff, or no wire or nothing. So
You got to make sure you leave the spikes in the dishes. I
Yeah,
mean, come
right.
on, guys, right?
So it's a bit of a. So they just. So the Australians just jumped all these ditches, and they got their swords out, and another thing that worked in the favour of the Australians on that particular assault was the people manning the guns were not real fighters. They were technicians. They were engineers and stuff. They had rifles, of course, but they were not really disciplined fighters or hand-to-hand fighters. They were running these big guns, huge guns, and so they just ran out with their little guns, and they just got their heads chopped off. And the Australians didn't pull one rifle. They just chopped off heads, and all the engineers hit the ground. If they stood up, they lost their head, so they just stayed down.
Wow.
And then they went in the town of Bathsheba, and the British saw this, and they said, "Wow, the guns are silent." So they just came steaming across, and that caused that was the charge of Bathsheba, and there was nobody left there.
I've never heard this story.
Nobody to charge, because the Turks were in the town. They were bivouacking in the town. They were having a good time, drinking wine and screwing women and having a good time, you know. So what
As one does.
yeah, as one would do. So what they do? So there was nobody out there. So the whole Bathsheba fell then, and so that was the story of the charge of Bathsheba. But to go back to the saddle, though, there's the saddle made a huge difference throughout history. Like I said before, that there's no army without a saddle beat an army with a saddle. The saddle made the difference,
Yes.
not the quality of the fighters, especially in that time. Now, you know, mechanized machinery changed that, but it didn't really. The horse has been used since then, and not necessarily in the lead role they had before, but I saddled the horses in Afghanistan. They rode my Australian stock saddles.
I was just about to ask you if the Australian stock saddle, especially as exquisite it is made by you and your team, was good for battle.
Oh, it's wonderful for battle.
Now you tell me that it was used in Afghanistan.
Yeah, right. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, and the American forces, they loved it. The American Special Forces, because they could gallop after the Afghans who they were fighting, and they could just outrun them. and they had swords too, but they mostly had rifles, and they used rifles, but they just could easily outrun the Turks on the Turks on their horses, because they're riding mostly bareback and mostly crappy saddles.
Right.
But the saddles I sent over were great, and I sent them down to Fort Hood, and they loved them. I made a lot of money selling saddles to the U.S. military in Afghanistan. In fact, I'm the last saddler of saddlery for warrior horses. I'm the last one who did it.
Really?
Which is pretty odd.
Because you get to have that designation, you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Sorry, I see what you're saying, sir.
Yeah, but apart from being a warrior friend, the horse for me really remains a great healer.
Yeah.
And people are discovering that now. There's horse therapy. There's all kind of healing that people get out of horses, and I've experienced it myself. I get on a horse sometimes and I got a headache. For example, I got something.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get a headache a lot when I drank a lot, but I don't drink anymore. So oddly enough, I'm still getting headaches. So maybe I should go back to drinking. I don't know. Maybe I quit for the wrong reason. But I can get on a horse and
automatically feel better.
Everything goes away. You feel the power. And you feel so indomitable. You feel so alive, and you can be galloping along and hear a bird. How do you hear a bird chirping when you're galloping? Because your instincts are so on the ball.
Yeah, sensitive.
And they have to
Ultra
be.
attuned.
Yeah, and you gotta feel the horse, and the horse has to trust you, and you have to trust the horse. And you don't have to do much if you're just walking around, but just walking around is pretty good because you can have a conversation with the horse.
Right.
It's pretty hard to have a conversation with a horse when you flat gallop and you don't know if you're going to die in the next 5 minutes, which I've been close to doing.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So
I'm excited for all the things that our listeners and viewers, whether you're a listener or a viewer, are going to learn about horses, because you're the man when it comes to horses, all things horses, and not just on like a level of having fun, but on a spiritual level, on an energy level.
yeah, I can feel the horse, and I have been since I've been a boy. I don't
You
know.
can teach people how to really like sort of open their heart to that and open their bodies to that.
Well, people do it pretty readily with dogs, but dogs are very faithful. You know what your dog's thinking all the time, and in lots of ways you can talk to your dog. You can just use a tone of voice, and the dog knows what that means.
Yeah.
So you have a verbal conversation happening with your dog. Now,
Mine is really frightening. I'm like, would you speak to a dog? Who's a good girl? If anybody saw me do that, like walked into my room, and they're like, would you speak to a doggy? They'd be like, wow.
Well,
if you talk to a horse like that, it'd be like,
no, that wouldn't work with a horse.
no.
Horses,
But it's important to talk to horses.
Yeah,
And trust them like you do your dog.
Well, what happens with the horse is that they like your voice. They like the sound of our voice because they've listened. Yeah. They've heard this sound for 5 million years. It's not new to them.
It's kind of in my blood. I feel like it's normal.
Yeah. And they like it. And so if you associate your sound with a stroke and a pat on the horse and associate that with your sound, then pretty soon all you got to do is talk to the horse. And pretty soon all you got to do is think something. And I practice this all the time.
You have a book called Talking
with Horses, yeah.
Where could somebody buy that if they're
it's on
watching or
Amazon.
Amazon. So you just search into Amazon Talking Horses.
No, Talking with Horses.
Talking with Horses. Okay, yeah. By Colin Dangaard.
Yeah.
You can buy it and read it.
Yeah, it's I've been possessed with this for a long time, so I put it down in writing, and like anything else, I told a story with it too. It's a romance story, but the girl is she's autistic, and autistic people are very good at communicating with horses in telepathic way.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they're very good because
I would imagine so because they're extremely smart.
they're smart, and they're not using the frontal lobe of their brain as much as we do. They're using the back lobes, which are the primitive. That's the primitive.
You got to use those back lobes, man.
Yeah, that's
You
the
gotta.
primitive brain.
You gotta.
So that comes through very well, and our brain mass, our rear brain is the same mass as the horse's brain. So it's pretty easy to, not easy, but you can tune in, but you have to tune in.
Yeah.
And you've got
Of
to.
course.
So if I'm riding a horse and I'm with myself, and sometimes I ride with people a lot too, but I tell people, if you're riding with me, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to you. I don't like to talk. If I'm having a conversation with my horse, doesn't mean I'm talking. I'm having a mental conversation. Well, I can't also have a verbal conversation.
Yes, you're like, I'm not ignoring you. Don't take it personally.
Yeah, but I do notice that if I'm riding along and I'm having a nice conversation with my horse, and then somebody rides along beside me and they say, "Oh, how you doing, Colin?" I say, "Yeah, I'm great, Fred. How are you doing?" "Yeah, well, it's a nice day, isn't it? Oh, what are we gonna do today?" Well, now my mind is on Fred, so I'm having a conversation with him. Right away, that horse has ditched me mentally.
Yeah. You're disconnected at that point.
Yeah, disconnected. Now I have to get back and disconnect, which is not a big deal, but I have to.
Yeah.
And you got to lock in.
And speaking of connecting, we're going to be connecting again and again with all of you in our next episodes about horses and about health. And what else would you say?
Well, I think health is so relevant, and the health that comes from within, and it comes from being more riveted in nature. Like I said, if even putting your hands in a garden, naked hands in a garden, you get the earth's power comes up to you. The trouble is, we live in high rises, or we live wherever we live, and our skin never touches the ground. Right. Well, that's a bad thing, and you might notice that if you're in a high-rise building and you've been out walking in the garden or something, you get in a high-rise building and you go up, take the elevator up to the 10th floor, you reach for a doorknob and zap.
Or even touch someone who's biz.
Yeah, well, that's because you're getting grounded.
Right.
And because you've built up all this energy, electrical energy, which the earth hasn't taken away or given back. So that's what happens. So if you can connect to the earth at least once or twice or 3 times a day, connect to the earth constantly, and that's a good thing. And having an animal is great. With your dog, you can pat your dog. If dog's out running around, well, you get earth from your dog.
Yeah.
You feel, sometimes you feel a zap even if you touch the dog, and you don't feel it much with horses because of their mass, so it's a bit different.
And whether you're in an office or at work, you're working from home, you're in your house, wherever you are, you got to get outside, right? You got to get your hands dirty, your feet dirty, walk around. Your animals should be able to be outside.
Yes, definitely.
People that have their dogs in apartments all day long and they only walk them once.
No.
You're not going to get much from the dog. The dog's not getting much at all. But when you listen to Colin Dangaard's show and you learn about the power of the earth, I believe, because I know, because I have experienced this with you myself, it will change your life. 100%. Right?
You're right, Jared. Good for you, mate.
Well, so we'll be talking again soon.
Right on.
And congrats on our first episode. We're patting ourselves on the back. We're thanking you for listening. We're thanking you for watching. And you will not believe how much fun our next episode is going to be, right?
Oh, yeah. I got some really good, sexy stuff.
Sexy stuff coming up next.
For there was time beyond time and space, a pleasure forever. I look for your face beyond time and space.